It was a Thursday morning in Lower Manhattan, 8:30, and the streets were already pulsing with a rhythm only New York could conjure. Horns bled into one another, crosswalks heaved under the weight of commuters, and the air was thick with a cocktail of urgency, burnt pretzel carts, and the lingering chill of late February. Cassandra Hill walked with purpose. Her navy blue heels clicked against the pavement like punctuation marks. She wasn't fast. She didn't have to be. There was something about her stride, the way her shoulders held a quiet command, that made people instinctively step aside. She wore a crisp white blouse beneath a tailored cobalt blazer, the lapel of which bore no pins or logos, only the poise of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. Her hair was braided back into a tight, professional bun, and her eyes, dark, still, and scanning, missed nothing. Most people didn't know her name yet. Not really, and she liked it that way. For years, Cassandra had worked behind closed doors, making a name not with speeches or scandals, but with silence and results. She'd led operations that unraveled trafficking networks, exposed corporate espionage rings, and unearthed threats buried so deep in bureaucracy that even the press couldn't chase them down. 2 weeks ago, she'd been confirmed as the new director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The announcement had sparked chatter in D.C., pride in black communities, and ire in certain corners of law enforcement. But to Cassandra, it wasn't about identity. It was about justice. The job wasn't a stage. It was a weapon, and she intended to wield it precisely. Still, this morning wasn't about justice. It was about coffee. She'd just left a classified interagency meeting uptown with the Attorney General's office and decided, against her driver's suggestion, to walk a few blocks and duck into her favorite cafe. Not the slick ones near Capitol Hill. This one was small, brick-walled, with jazz humming softly through the speakers and a menu board that still used real chalk. Inside, the cafe buzzed with the subdued energy of professionals on the edge of caffeine withdrawals. A few students typed furiously in the corner. A man in a puffy coat argued with a Bluetooth headset. And behind the counter, a young barista with a lip ring called out, "Order for Maya!" Cassandra took her place in line, behind a woman juggling a stroller and in front of a tall white man in jeans and a dark zip-up jacket. She caught a glimpse of a badge on his hip as he adjusted his coat. Off-duty law enforcement, clearly, but paid it no mind. As the line inched forward, Cassandra stepped up to the register and gave a small smile. Medium black coffee. No sugar. No room. The barista nodded. Name? Cass. She turned, stepping aside toward the pickup counter. That's when it happened. The man behind her, tall, early 40s, buzz-cut, the type whose presence always felt like a dare, stepped forward, jaw clenched. "Hey," he snapped. "You just cut me." Cassandra blinked, calmly. "Excuse me?" "You walked right up and cut the line." "No," she said, polite but firm. "I've been in line for several minutes. I was ahead of you." His eyes narrowed. "Bullshit. I saw you walk in and stand there like you own the place." A silence began to ripple through the cafe. 2 people stopped mid-text. A woman near the door shifted her weight uneasily. Cassandra didn't raise her voice. "Sir, I assure you I was in line. There's no need." Before she could finish, his hand shot out, grabbed the steaming cup from the counter labeled Cass, and in one sudden horrifying motion, he threw the hot coffee straight into her face. The splash of it hit with a hiss. The cup cracked midair and fell, still spinning, to the floor. Gasps echoed through the cafe. Someone dropped a phone. Someone else shouted, "Hey, what the hell?" Cassandra stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek. The heat clawed at her skin, stung her eyelid, seared her neck just below the collar. Her other hand gripped the counter for balance. But she didn't scream. She didn't fall. She just froze, eyes wide, breathing sharp, stunned. The man smirked. "Maybe next time, wait your turn." And then he turned to leave. But before his foot hit the door, the cafe manager stepped forward. A wiry kid with anxious hands and a conscience too big to stay quiet. "You're not going anywhere," he said, voice cracking. "You just assaulted her." The man laughed. "Don't even know who she is. Don't care. A soft, calm voice from behind the counter, belonging to the young barista, spoke up. "You're going to care. Because that security camera?" She pointed up. "It got everything." The man hesitated. His hand fell to the badge on his hip, but he didn't show it. He just sneered. Cassandra straightened slowly, her expression shifting from shock to something colder. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a black leather ID case. She flipped it open. Inside, a federal shield. Below it, her photo. Her name, Cassandra L. Hill, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The cafe went silent. The man's face drained of color. Cassandra stared him down. One side of her face still reddened from the burn. Her voice, when it came, was like ice over steel. "You just threw scalding coffee on the FBI director." He took a step back. I didn't know." "I know you didn't," she said. Then she turned to the manager. "Call the police. I'll be waiting." The arrest was quiet but firm. A pair of NYPD officers, called in by the cafe and briefed immediately, took the man into custody within minutes. The man tried to flash his own credentials. Off-duty officer, Narcotics Division, claimed it was a misunderstanding. But the footage didn't lie. Neither did the burn on Cassandra's cheek. 2 hours later, the video leaked. It wasn't official footage. It was a phone recording, slightly shaky, but damning. The moment the cup hit Cassandra, her flinch, his laugh, her badge. Within 45 minutes, the video had 1 million views. By lunchtime, it was trending globally. Hashtag her name is Cassandra. Hashtag coffee and consequence. Hashtag FBI while black. The public response wasn't just shock. It was volcanic. The idea that the newly appointed black woman FBI director had been assaulted in public over a false accusation struck a nerve deeper than policy. It screamed something undeniable about the moment America was living in. People saw themselves in her. Black women posted photos of themselves in blazers with captions, "This could have been me." Civil rights lawyers demanded swift action. Cable news scrambled to piece together profiles of Cassandra Hill, most of which felt poorly researched, rushed, and filtered through a lens of surprise that a black woman could have held so much power quietly. But Cassandra didn't do interviews. She didn't post statements. She didn't rush to hold a press conference. She went home, took off her blazer, applied aloe to the side of her face, called her mother, and said, "Don't worry, I'm okay." But even she didn't know what was about to unfold next. Because the man who threw that coffee, he had a history, and in 2 days the entire country would know it. By dawn the next morning, the entire country knew his name. Detective Bradley Knox, Narcotics Division, NYPD, 17 years in service. Commendations, undercover work, 0 official complaints, but unofficially, whispers, stories. 3 civil suits, all quietly settled. 2 involved excessive force during stop and frisks in East Harlem. 1 alleged racial profiling in a drug raid that turned up nothing but a terrified grandmother and a broken kitchen table. None of the cases ever made it to trial. No internal reprimands, no press, just paperwork and silence. Until now. Now there was footage, a burn, a name he couldn't ignore. Cassandra Hill wasn't someone they could gaslight or paper over. She wasn't a hashtag from an unknown zip code. She was federal, and that meant everything was about to unravel. Inside her DC office, Cassandra stood by the window, sipping cold chamomile tea from a ceramic mug that read, "I've read your file." The swelling on her cheek had faded overnight, reduced to a red patch below her right eye. But it wasn't the burn that kept her awake. It was the silence from the system. Since the video went viral, she'd received over 100 direct messages from lawmakers, agency heads, reporters, and private citizens. Some were performative, some genuinely outraged. Some, like the voicemail from a retired judge in Alabama, were laced with quiet horror. "I watched what happened, Cassandra," he'd said, "and I thought, if they'll do that to you, what happens to the ones no one knows?" She hadn't called him back. She didn't have the words yet. Across the office, her deputy director, Marisol Diaz, entered with a stack of folders and a look that said the news hadn't improved overnight. "They're already trying to spin it," Marisol said. "Knox's attorney's claiming he didn't know who you were, that it wasn't personal, just a heated misunderstanding." Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "He threw coffee on me. They're calling it an accidental splash." Cassandra set the mug down with a quiet thunk. "Did the Bureau issue a statement yet?" "Not yet. They're holding until your call. Director, they're looking to you." "I'm not issuing a statement," Cassandra said. Marisol blinked. "Excuse me. Not yet. If I speak too soon, I become the story. Again. If I speak later, I control the frame." Marisol exhaled. "They're not ready for how you play chess. They never are." Meanwhile, in a modest apartment in Queens, Bradley Knox sat at his kitchen table surrounded by silence. He hadn't spoken to his union rep in 2 days. His phone had been confiscated for evidence. His neighbors had stopped making eye contact. His teenage son hadn't come home last night. His wife had left the house with a single sentence. "You weren't just stupid. You were cruel." He replayed the footage again and again. The part where he smirked. The hiss of the coffee. The way Cassandra didn't scream. The way she just looked at him like she saw through everything. He had told himself it was an overreaction. A mistake. Misplaced anger. But somewhere deeper, darker, he knew the truth. He had seen a black woman in a blazer and assumed she didn't belong. That was the rot. And now it had bloomed. Cassandra didn't speak to the press that week. She went to work. Held classified briefings. Reviewed counterintelligence files. Signed off on a major undercover sting in Miami. But quietly, she had her team begin a background sweep on Detective Knox, not just for retaliation, but for context. What they found was worse than expected. Knox had a pattern. Informal complaints made to internal affairs never followed up. Notes from young officers during training programs flagging his language as racially aggressive. One anonymous email from 5 years ago titled simply, "He's dangerous." Cassandra read the files in silence. When she finished, she turned to Marisol. "Prepare a memo. Title it, 'The Cost of Silence.' We're sending it to every field office, every U.S. attorney, every major department in the country." Marisol looked at her. "That's a declaration." "No," Cassandra said. "It's a reminder." By the weekend, the pressure was boiling. Knox had been arrested and released on bond. Civil rights attorneys were lining up for Cassandra to sue. TV hosts debated whether she had been targeted because of her race or just another customer in a tent city. But America wasn't asking pundits anymore. They were asking themselves. College campuses held teach-ins. Black sororities rallied in solidarity. A group of cafe owners in Brooklyn closed their shops for 1 hour, writing "We stand with Cassandra" on their windows in chalk. And still Cassandra said nothing publicly. Until Sunday. That morning, she appeared unannounced at a small community church in Southeast D.C. She didn't arrive with an entourage. No press pool. No security convoy. Just her and her mother, who clutched her hand the way mothers do when the world has recently reminded them how fragile things are. The congregation gasped when she walked in. But the pastor, a tall man with eyes like someone who'd seen too much, simply opened his arms and said, "Come home, child." She sat in the third row, sang him softly, bowed her head in prayer. And after the final benediction, she stood. The room fell quiet. She didn't speak from a podium. She didn't shout. She just turned to the people, her people, and said, "I wasn't hurt by coffee. I've been burned before. I was hurt by how easy it was for someone to think I didn't belong, to believe I was in their way, to look at me and not see a human being." Her voice shook slightly. "I'm the director of the FBI, and they still didn't see me. So what happens to the ones without badges? Without titles? Silence. I've been taught all my life to remain calm, to walk away, to be the bigger person. But maybe now we need to be the louder person, the visible one. The one they can't explain away." Applause built slowly, then rose like thunder. Outside, reporters waited. But Cassandra didn't stop. She walked straight through them. Eyes ahead. Shoulders high. That night, the Attorney General issued a statement. The Justice Department was opening a civil rights investigation into the NYPD's handling of past complaints involving Bradley Knox. And Cassandra? She finally released one sentence to the press. Just one. "You should ask how many others he threw coffee on when no one was recording." The Monday after Cassandra's public remark, the country was no longer just watching. It was reacting. Newsrooms scrambled to reframe their coverage. Talk shows that had treated her assault like a curious incident now treated it like a national referendum on racial bias and unchecked authority. Political pundits switched tones, suddenly aware they had misread the cultural temperature and the woman at the center of it all. Cassandra Hill had not screamed. She had not wept on camera. She had not begged the public for sympathy. But her silence had made more noise than 1,000 press conferences. And now her voice, when she finally chose to use it, was not just piercing. It was surgical. You should ask how many others he threw coffee on when no one was recording. That sentence spread like gasoline across the dry fields of America's subconscious. And for the first time, people started asking questions they had never asked before. Not just about Knox, but about the ones like him. In a small town in Illinois, a young black man posted a TikTok recounting a traffic stop from 2 years ago. The officer who pulled him over? Knox. He had been in the area for a DA joint task force. The man remembered being thrown onto his car hood for moving too fast when reaching for his license. I didn't get a badge number, the man said on camera. But I remember his eyes. And it was him. The video went viral. By Tuesday, 3 more testimonies emerged. One from a woman who said Knox detained her outside her own apartment building in 2017 while she was bringing groceries home. Another from a delivery driver who claimed Knox drew his weapon on him because the truck looked suspicious. A third, anonymous, female, and barely able to finish her words, described being cornered in a Bronx parking garage by a white cop who called me a liar for crying. All alleged incidents. None officially filed. But their patterns were impossible to ignore. And one thing bound them together. There were no cameras then. Inside FBI headquarters, Cassandra read each testimony personally. She didn't pass them to an assistant. She didn't skim. She took notes. She circled words. She made charts. And one night, alone in her office at 11:42 p.m., she whispered to herself. Knox wasn't the mistake. He was the system working exactly as designed. She sat back in her chair, eyes heavy. Her office was quiet. The building dark. But her mind was ablaze. How many Knoxes had she passed in corridors? In meetings? On interagency calls where jokes danced just over the line and were never challenged? And how many more Cassandras had been burned without the badge, without the title, without the audience? She opened her laptop and began writing, not a speech, not a memo. A directive. A new internal FBI policy. Operation Mirror. A sweeping internal review of behavioral complaints, racial bias indicators, and unofficial patterns of misconduct across all bureau personnel dating back 20 years. No one was safe from audit. Not even her. Especially not her. This isn't about who we are, she typed. It's about who we've protected ourselves from being forced to see. By Thursday, Knox was officially terminated from the NYPD. The decision had come quickly, spurred by both public outrage and mounting pressure from city officials. But it wasn't the firing that rocked the headlines. It was what came next. The NYPD released a statement disclosing that Knox's personnel file had, in fact, contained undocumented concerns. Notes never processed. Informal remarks. Pattern flags. The silence wasn't accidental. It was institutional. And that set off the real explosion. A coalition of civil rights organizations filed a Freedom of Information Act request demanding access to all informal officer conduct notes in the last 10 years. Several city councils voted to mandate civilian oversight panels. And on Capitol Hill, a junior senator from New Jersey cited Cassandra's case in a speech proposing national law enforcement transparency legislation. The ripple had become a wave. And Cassandra? She kept moving. The following week, she received a request. It came from a mother in Newark whose son had been paralyzed by an off-duty officer after being mistaken for a robbery suspect outside a gas station. The mother didn't ask for justice. She asked for Cassandra to attend her son's graduation. High school, class of 2024. The boy had studied from a wheelchair for 3 years, breathing through a tube. But he was graduating with honors. The note was handwritten. I don't have power like you, it read. But I believe in what you said. About being visible. You're already visible to my son. Cassandra stared at the letter for a long time. Then, without a word, she pulled up her schedule and cleared a Friday afternoon in June. Not for a meeting. For a seat in the back of a high school gym. But the peace didn't last long. One morning, Marisol burst into her office without knocking. We have a leak. Cassandra blinked. Of what? Your personnel file. And private family photos. Someone sent them to 3 media outlets. Cassandra felt her stomach harden, but her voice stayed flat. What's in the file? College essays? Disciplinary reports from your early training days. Nothing illegal. Just things they want to twist. Things they want to make you look angry. Like a threat. Cassandra exhaled. Let them try. That afternoon, one news site published a headline. FBI director once called systemic racism a machine of slow murder in college essay. The implication was clear: she was too radical, too biased, too outspoken. But instead of issuing a denial, Cassandra did something else. She reposted the article on her official FBI account, captioned it with just 3 words. I still believe. The post shattered engagement records. And the nation answered. Teachers assigned her essay in high school civics classes. Churches printed it as reading material. Black student unions across the country held reading circles. And in every corner of the country, someone who had once felt invisible saw a little more of themselves reflected. That weekend, Cassandra finally broke her silence with a national interview, her first as director. No glitz. No overproduction. Just her, seated opposite a journalist who didn't interrupt and didn't sanitize. And halfway through the interview, the journalist asked, Director Hill, do you think what happened to you was a blessing in disguise? A moment that woke the country up. Cassandra paused, and then said something that no one expected. No, I don't believe pain should ever be a blessing. We've glamorized survival too much. What happened to me should never have happened. And the people who see my face now? They should have seen the faces before me. The ones with no badge. No title. Just pain. She leaned in, voice soft but unshakable. But I do believe in turning pain into purpose. And right now, that's my job. That's all of our job. The next morning, the clip had more than 25 million views. And the world wasn't just watching anymore. They were listening. It had been exactly 26 days since Cassandra Hill was burned in a Manhattan cafe. In that time, she had become something unexpected. Not just a federal figure, not just a symbol, but something heavier. She had become a mirror. And the world, at least, the part of it willing to look, was seeing itself in her reflection. But there were those who still couldn't stand what they saw. On a Tuesday morning in late March, Cassandra arrived at her office earlier than usual. Her team hadn't yet filtered in. The security checkpoint was quiet. Even the lobby guard, usually eager for a respectful nod or small talk, avoided her eyes. Something was off. Inside her private elevator, the phone in her hand buzzed. A single message. From an unknown number. It read, You may have fooled the public, but we know who you are. Step down. Or we step in. She didn't flinch. Not because she wasn't startled, but because she didn't give threats the courtesy of reaction. Instead, she handed the phone to Marisol as soon as she stepped into her office. Trace it. Document it. Don't publicize it. Marisol looked shaken. Do you want increased security? I want increased focus, Cassandra said. We're hitting nerves. Let's dig deeper. And they did. Within the week, her team uncovered something disturbing. In the years prior to Knox's assault, more than a dozen law enforcement officers had resigned from various departments under the pretense of mental health leaves. They'd reappeared months later working private security, often for politically connected firms, sometimes even international. Most of them had records similar to Knox. Informal flags. Unofficial notes. No formal discipline. Vanished, not removed. And now they were forming a pattern, one that led into a dark corner of the justice ecosystem that had operated quietly for years. A system of transfer without consequence. Cassandra took the files home that night, sat on the floor in her apartment, spread them out like a crime scene. She stared at names, photos, timestamps, field reports, resignation letters, and something inside her cracked, not out of rage, but out of sheer, bitter clarity. This isn't a broken system, she whispered. It's a system performing exactly as built. She didn't sleep that night. 3 days later, Cassandra sat before the Joint Senate Oversight Committee. It wasn't a planned hearing. It had been called suddenly under the guise of general agency review. But everyone in the room knew what it was, a subtle attempt to shake her, to slow her down, to remind her that power still answered to older, paler hands. The committee chair, Senator Ronald Pierce, leaned forward with his trademark Southern drawl and half-smile. Director Hill, given the media circus surrounding your unfortunate incident, do you feel your personal feelings about law enforcement are impairing your professional objectivity? Cassandra didn't blink. No, Senator. Pierce chuckled. Well, with all due respect, your public statements suggest otherwise. You referred to the criminal justice system as a machine of slow murder in your college writing, isn't that right? I did. And I still believe that when that machine goes unexamined. Somewhere behind her, Marisol suppressed a grin. Cassandra continued. What I've learned in my tenure is that the most dangerous bias is the kind that wears a badge of neutrality. That's the bias that hides behind forms, deflections, and budget reports. And it's the bias that the FBI is committed to exposing. Pierce leaned back. Are you saying the FBI is racist, Director Hill? I'm saying America has been. And law enforcement doesn't live outside of that truth. Murmurs filled the chamber. But Cassandra didn't raise her voice. She didn't fold. She sat still, calm, as if daring the room to challenge what they already knew but couldn't say aloud. After the hearing, a reporter caught her in the hallway. What gives you the strength to keep going? They asked. Cassandra paused. My mother raised me to believe that silence never saved anyone. Then she walked away. But strength, even for Cassandra Hill, had limits. It was a Wednesday night, just past 9 p.m. She was home, finally. A pot of untouched jasmine rice sat cooling on the stove. The TV flickered silently with muted headlines. And her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From exhaustion. The past month had been a war. And while she had won most battles, the body always knew when the war wasn't over. She walked to her bathroom, stared at herself in the mirror. The fading scar on her cheekbone had shrunk to a reddish patch. Her eyes were rimmed with fatigue. She didn't look heroic. She looked human. She poured herself water, sat on the couch, and for the first time in weeks, she opened the wooden box that sat hidden beneath her coffee table. Inside were letters. From years past. From her father. From mentors long gone. From herself, notes she had written as a young recruit at Quantico, promising who she'd never become. She read them all. Then, with trembling hands, she added a new one. It read, If you ever forget why you started, remember, you once stood in a room full of power and you didn't flinch. Keep standing. She folded the letter, slipped it into the box, and finally slept. The next morning, her office received an envelope. Unmarked. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a group of children, black, brown, white, standing in a classroom. On the blackboard behind them were the words, FBI Director Cassandra Hill came to our school. We want to be like her. Cassandra stared at the photo. Her eyes welled. Just slightly. Then she turned it over. On the back, a crayon-scrawled note. You make me feel safe. Maya, age 7. And in that moment, all the hearings, the threats, the articles, the wounds, they fell away. Because that was the legacy. Not the badge. Not the title. But the feeling in a 7-year-old girl's heart that justice could look like her. And that it might not scream. It might not break. It might simply stand. The school photo stayed on Cassandra Hill's desk for weeks. Sometimes she would catch herself staring at it during briefings, zoning out as analysts broke down intelligence threads or tactical teams discussed logistics. It wasn't distraction, it was centering. A way to remind herself that every spreadsheet, every decision, every hour of tension and confrontation pointed back to something simple, the hope in a child's handwriting. You make me feel safe. It haunted her. It saved her. Some days, both at once. But the work didn't slow down. If anything, it escalated. Operation Mirror, the internal audit Cassandra had launched quietly, was uncovering more than she'd anticipated. Not just problematic patterns, but cover-ups. Supervisor notes buried in locked filing systems. Complaints reworded in paperwork so they never triggered formal reviews. Transfer records marked voluntary that had, in fact, been prompted by internal pressure. There was no singular villain. That would have been easier. There was just a culture. Not one of overt violence, but of subtle absolution. And now, under Cassandra's direction, that culture was being dragged into daylight. The media had shifted, too. Cassandra's refusal to collapse under pressure had changed the narrative. She was no longer just the woman who got coffee thrown on her. She was becoming known as a reformer of quiet storms, someone who didn't grandstand but also didn't flinch. That made her dangerous. To the right people. At a fundraiser in Florida, a political strategist was recorded whispering, "She's too poised. It's unnerving. No tears. No rage. Just fire behind glass." That clip, once leaked, went viral. And the response was swift. People posted pictures of their own mothers, sisters, daughters, all staring into mirrors with the caption, "Fire behind glass." It became a movement. Quiet. Artistic. Raw. Murals popped up in Detroit, Oakland, and Atlanta. Poets referenced her in verses about resilience. A jazz musician wrote a piece titled, "Still Standing." Civil rights attorneys began citing her case when arguing broader systemic patterns. And then Congress called. A bipartisan delegation invited Cassandra to testify on the broader implications of officer misconduct retention. But Cassandra declined. Instead, she made a counteroffer: she would host the hearing. At the FBI headquarters. under the condition that it would be co-chaired by civilian observers, survivors of police violence, retired educators, community leaders. The response? Stunned silence. And then, acceptance. And so, for the first time in the agency's history, a federal hall of power made room for people without power. The day of the hearing was unlike any other. The atrium was lined with folding chairs not reserved for lawmakers but for neighbors. Elderly men in church hats. Teenagers in thrift store suits. Mothers holding photos of their children still waiting for closure. Cassandra stood at the podium. No introduction. Just her presence. "My name is Cassandra Hill," she began. "And before I was director of the FBI, I was a girl raised in a city where people feared the sirens more than the criminals." She paused. "I am not here to lecture law enforcement. I am here to demand that we love this country enough to heal it. And healing begins when those in power stop protecting their comfort and start protecting the people." She read names, victims, whistleblowers, officers who had tried to speak up and been silenced. She read numbers, stats buried in internal memos, percentages that painted a clear picture of systemic rot. She read a letter from a former recruit who had dropped out after hearing their superiors say, "Don't waste kindness on suspects." And then she read from Maya's letter. The room broke. Not from noise. From stillness. Because nothing feels heavier than being seen, especially in a room built to ignore you. That night, after everyone had gone home, Cassandra walked the quiet halls of the FBI alone. No cameras. No aides. Just the echo of her heels and the low hum of the building's overnight systems. She paused outside the training division. A plaque read, "To serve with integrity." She touched it gently. Then walked inside. Alone, she stood at the whiteboard and wrote one sentence in black marker. "We cannot serve what we refuse to see." She capped the pen, turned off the lights, and left it there. But justice, even at its best, is never immediate. 2 weeks later, Cassandra received a package. Inside, an envelope from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. People versus Bradley Knox. Her hands didn't shake. She opened it. The letter stated that the case had been reviewed and revised. Knox would not be charged only with misdemeanor assault. The charges had been upgraded to felony assault, hate crime enhancement, and obstruction due to his attempt to use official credentials to deflect accountability. Trial would proceed within the month. Cassandra set the paper down. Exhaled. Not from relief, but from readiness. The trial would be public. Televised. Everyone wanted to know what Cassandra Hill would say on the stand. Would she cry? Would she attack? Would she give the nation a moment it could devour? But Cassandra had no intention of giving them what they wanted. She would give them what they needed. She arrived in court in a navy pantsuit, her scar still visible, her badge clipped quietly inside her jacket. When she took the stand, she didn't speak like a director. She spoke like a woman. "I'm not here because I'm the head of an agency," she began. "I'm here because one morning I walked into a cafe and was reminded how fragile dignity is." She spoke calmly. She never used the word racist. She didn't need to. She used the word entitlement, the word assumption, the word training, and most importantly, pattern. She told the jury what they already knew, and then she asked them to make it count. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing would come later. But for now, there was something. Not closure. Not completely. But precedent. And that was everything. That evening, Cassandra returned to the cafe. Not for a press stunt. Not for photos. She went alone. Sat at the corner table. Ordered the same drink. Medium black coffee. No sugar. No room. The barista brought it over. "You know," she said quietly, "I was here that day." I froze. I didn't say anything. Cassandra looked up. "You didn't have to." The barista bit her lip. "Do you hate that it happened here?" Cassandra thought for a moment. "No," she said. "Because if it hadn't, maybe the world wouldn't have stopped long enough to look." She sipped the coffee. Then stood. And as she stepped outside into the New York chill, the world felt different. Not healed. But not blind. Not anymore. It was late spring in Washington, D.C. Cherry blossoms had come and gone, their petals scattered across sidewalks like forgotten promises. Tourists returned to the city, their eyes upward, their steps loud. The news cycle had already begun to shift. New controversies. New debates. America's short memory gently tugging at the hem of the Cassandra Hill story, trying to pull it into the past. But Cassandra wasn't done. She was never interested in being a moment. She was here to be a marker. A place where the narrative changed direction. Where silence ended and something permanent began. The sentencing of Bradley Knox took place on a rainy Thursday morning. It had been 97 days since the coffee. 64 since his conviction. 37 since his attorneys had begged the court for leniency. The courtroom was packed, though Cassandra wasn't there. She had already said what needed to be said. The judge, a stoic black woman in her 60s with weary eyes and an iron mouth, delivered the sentence without flourish. 10 years. No parole for 5. Loss of pension. Federal database listing. But it wasn't the sentence that made headlines. It was the judge's final statement. You didn't throw coffee, Mr. Knox. You threw history. You threw generations of disregard and the confidence that nothing would ever happen to you. Well, something did. And it's not justice because of your punishment. It's justice because she stood back up. The room went silent. And then, applause. Not because of joy, but because someone had said it. And in that moment, the air shifted again. Cassandra watched the sentencing from her office. Alone. No staff. No aides. Just her and the screen. When it ended, she closed the laptop and stood by the window. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the glass. It reminded her of something her grandmother used to say. When it rains like this, it's the sky washing its face. She smiled to herself. And then she turned back to her desk and to the files stacked high with other names. Cases. Calls for help. Petitions. Warnings. People who wouldn't go viral. People without cameras or titles or the words to articulate the weight they carried every time they walked into a store or sat in a car or tried to explain their pain to someone trained not to hear it. She rolled up her sleeves and kept working. 2 weeks later, Cassandra took a short trip unannounced, unrecorded. She flew commercial. Sat near the window. No security detail. She arrived at a quiet high school gymnasium in Newark. It was hot. The folding chairs squeaked. The acoustics were terrible. But the boy in the wheelchair, David, was on stage wearing his honor sash. When he locked eyes with her from across the gym, his hands trembled on his lap. She smiled. He grinned back. He had made it. And when his mother wept quietly beside Cassandra during the national anthem, Cassandra gently took her hand. No press needed. No camera caught it. But that was the moment that mattered. Back in D.C., the FBI's internal reforms began taking visible shape. Operation Mirror expanded into a full-fledged federal review model now being adopted by 3 other agencies. Bias and conduct metrics were no longer tucked inside private HR folders. They were tracked, charted, published internally, and most critically reviewed by independent oversight boards with real power. Was it perfect? No. Was it progress? Unmistakably. And then one morning in June, a new case landed on Cassandra's desk. Not a national crisis. Not an international threat. A letter from a correctional officer in Kansas. He'd been let go after trying to report a pattern of abuse in his facility. He didn't want reinstatement. He didn't want money. He just wanted someone to know he had tried. I'm not a good man, he wrote, but I want to become one. Watching you made me believe that's still possible. Cassandra folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box beneath her desk. Right next to the letter she'd written to herself on the night she couldn't sleep. Right next to Maya's drawing. Right next to a photo of her father, taken the year he died in uniform after 30 years as a postal worker who had endured more slurs than he could count and never once stopped delivering. Right next to a small note her mother had tucked into her suitcase the day she left for Quantico. Remember who you are, and who you came here for. Then the twist no one expected. One afternoon, as Cassandra was leaving a policy meeting, her phone buzzed with a text from Marisol. Turn on Channel 4. Now. Cassandra stepped into a side office, found a TV, and flipped it on. It was a press conference. The governor of New York was speaking. He cleared his throat, looked directly into the camera. We have confirmed that 2 senior police officials, both involved in internal decisions to suppress misconduct records, have resigned effective immediately. We are launching a full, transparent review of departmental practices. Then he paused. And I want to thank the person whose quiet, relentless integrity helped us get here, Director Cassandra Hill. She didn't just demand change. She showed us how to do it. The room erupted in applause. Cassandra turned off the TV, and for the first time in a long time she sat down. Not because she was tired, because something inside her had finally settled. Not justice, but momentum. That night she walked the city alone. No driver. No heels. Just sneakers and a jacket zipped to her chin. She passed a mural of herself 10 feet tall, painted on the side of a building in Southeast. She stopped for a moment. A little girl stood in front of it, holding her mother's hand. The girl looked up, then at Cassandra, then back again. Is that you? The girl asked. Cassandra crouched down. It might be, she said, smiling. The girl tilted her head. Are you famous? Cassandra paused. No, sweetheart. I'm visible. The girl grinned. I want to be that too. Cassandra stood, looked at the mother, nodded, then walked on into the dusk. And the city held her steps like a heartbeat. Still, strong, seen. Justice is not defined by titles or institutions, but by the courage to stand when silence is easier. Cassandra's story reminds us that true change begins when the invisible become visible and the system is finally forced to look in the mirror. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Like to show your support, share to keep these truths alive, and subscribe for more powerful stories that expose injustice and inspire change. Your voice matters.